Hey, what's up guys? This is an additional video to the Kyle Rittenhouse situation. Today's inquiry is going to cover the criminal complaint and the charges levied against Kyle. We're going to discuss what is the difference between murder and homicide according to Wisconsin law. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, you are watching Inspiring Inquiry. Alright, so for those of you who missed my last video, I'll go ahead and put a card at the top so you guys can click on that and watch it if you want. It's about 20 minutes long and it shows a number of videos that are involved in the situation. It shows Kyle, it shows some of the shootings and things like that. During those interactions, 2 people were shot and killed and a 3rd wounded. Since then, it has sparked a large debate online as to whether or not the actions that Kyle Rittenhouse took that night, given the circumstances, were justified, as well as a number of people coming out in defense of the protesters / rioters who they claim were trying to disarm him after he shot the first person, Joseph Rosenbaum. Well, in my last video, we went over the events that took place. We discussed a little bit of the videos that were surrounding the situation, but today I wanted to focus on the criminal complaint and the charges levied at Kyle Rittenhouse by the state of Wisconsin. So let's go ahead and take a look at that criminal complaint, and we're going to go by each charge one by one, discussing what it means and why they likely charged him with this in the first place. And then I'm going to give you my opinion as to whether or not I think that there is a good argument for these charges actually sticking on Kyle Rittenhouse. So come on over here and let's take a look at the criminal complaint. Now, Wisconsin defines causing the death of another person a little different than other places. Aside from felony murder, they classify it as either intentional or unintentional homicide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what the nuance of that is, but in addition to the charges that he has levied against him, attached to each one of them, aside from the last one, which is a possession of a dangerous weapon of a person under the age of 18, is use of a dangerous weapon. Now, use of a dangerous weapon is defined as if a person commits a crime while possessing, using, or threatening to use a dangerous weapon. The maximum term for imprisonment prescribed by law for that crime may be increased. In this case, Section B is applied due to it only being a felony, where the maximum punishment is greater than 5 years or a life term, in which the maximum term may be increased by not more than 5 years with this additional charge. The state of Wisconsin defines dangerous weapon, at least for these purposes, as any firearm, loaded or unloaded. It also includes things like brass knuckles and nunchucks. So as we come over here, we can take a look at the charges levied against him. The first one being first-degree reckless homicide, use of a dangerous weapon. And this one is particularly against Joseph Rosenbaum. That is the first victim, the one who was shot in the head, among other places, as well as the back. Not really sure what the story is there. I can't wait for the investigation to uncover what really happened and how he got shot in the back. There were a number of other shots that were fired, so I'm not sure if it was from somebody else in the crowd or if it was actually from Rittenhouse himself. Now, like I said, the state of Wisconsin breaks it up into 3 categories. We have felony murder, unintentional homicide, and intentional homicide. Now, this first one is an unintentional reckless homicide. So we go down here and we look at what unintentional homicide is classified as. And it says unintentional homicide classifies certain laws as unintentional homicide, including but not limited to. That is homicide by intoxicated use of a vehicle or a firearm, or reckless homicide, 1st and 2nd degree. So let's go ahead and take a look at reckless homicide in the 1st and 2nd degree and see what it is. Now, 1st degree reckless homicide is what we are dealing with, but we're going to go ahead and address what the 2nd degree is as well. 1st degree reckless homicide is defined as recklessly causing the death of another human being under circumstances which show utter disregard for human life. It is a Class B felony and has a punishment of 60 years. Now, the key thing that we have to take a look at here is the words utter disregard, because that is the distinction between 1st degree and 2nd degree. Now, an utter disregard is defined as an utter disregard for human life is an objective standard of what a reasonable person in the defendant's position is presumed to have known and is shown through an examination of the acts that caused the death and the totality of circumstances surrounding the conduct. This is tough to define and is usually left up to the jury. Now, 2nd degree is defined similarly, although without the distinction of utter disregard as being a component. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, man, that sounds a little confusing and ambiguous, you would be right, because it is. In doing the research for this video, I tried to come up with a good definition of what utter disregard is, and ended up coming across articles in which people wrote complaining about it being a plague on the Wisconsin judicial system. That due to its ambiguous nature, that it has led to arbitrary standards being applied in court cases. Many have called to replace it with a more objective standard for assessing these types of cases. Now that we have a better, albeit incomplete, definition of what first-degree reckless homicide is, let's go ahead and move on to the second charge, which is first-degree recklessly endangering safety, use of a dangerous weapon. Now, this is specifically in reference to Mr. Richard McGinnis, who is the Daily Caller reporter that was there. He actually had a video interviewing Kyle Rittenhouse where he was talking to him a little bit about why he was there, and apparently he somewhat shadowed Kyle Rittenhouse. Now, I don't mean if this was intentional, but he was around him from that point and a few points after that, and when Kyle Rittenhouse actually shot Joseph Rosenbaum and had the other encounters, Richard McGinnis was right there to take action as soon as that first shooting happened. Now, this is a completely different charge than the first, but it also has the aspect of first and second degree to it. So we're going to go ahead and explain what first and second degree are in reference to this as well. Now, according to Wisconsin law, recklessly endangering safety in the first degree is whoever recklessly endangers another's safety under circumstances which show utter disregard for human life. Once again, utter disregard comes back into play. This is a Class F felony with 12 years and 6 months as a sentence. Now, when researching this law, I did come across a few things that they take into consideration when trying to determine this type of charge. Those things being why the person did it, how dangerous it was, if they should have known it was dangerous, whether they showed any regard for life whatsoever, and they take into consideration other facts related to the conduct. Now, that is the first degree level of this charge. The second degree does not require the showing of an utter disregard, but must show beyond a doubt that the defendant endangered the safety of another with criminally reckless conduct. Now, the second degree is a Class G felony with a maximum sentence of 10 years. But you may be asking yourself, what is criminally reckless conduct? Well, criminally reckless conduct is defined as conduct that created a risk of death or great bodily harm to another person. They must have been aware that their conduct created this risk and that the risk itself was unreasonable. Now, we all know what risk of death is, but great bodily harm could mean a few different things. Is it losing a pinky? Is it losing a whole leg? You know, what is great bodily harm? Is it just losing a lot of blood, getting shot, having surgery, those types of things? Great bodily harm is defined as being something you could die from or a permanent disfigurement or impairment. Now, I think that they got this one because of the fact that he was near when Rosenbaum was shooting. I think it was because he was shooting towards the crowd of people in a public place, in a parking lot as well. That might be why he ended up getting this particular charge. Now, continuing to move on, we take a look at the third charge, which is first degree intentional homicide, use of a dangerous weapon. Now, intentional homicide in the first degree is defined as causing the death of a person or an unborn child with the intent to kill that person. It is a Class A felony and carries the charge of life in prison. Now, this does also have a second degree to it, and the second degree being defined similarly, but in order to downgrade the charge, a defendant must present one of the 4 partial defenses for their actions. Now, the 4 things that they take into consideration when determining partial defenses for the second degree is adequate provocation. Was the defendant adequately provoked into exhibiting these behaviors? The second being unnecessary defensive force, and that's when you are under the belief that this amount of force is required, but it actually wasn't required. So that's why they call it a partial defense. Third being prevention of a felony, if he was preventing someone from committing a felony. And the fourth being coercion or necessity, if he was coerced or was made to do these acts. This charge of first-degree intentional homicide is directed at Anthony Huber. He was the one whose girlfriend has come out and spoken on his behalf since then, saying that he was just trying to disarm Kyle Rittenhouse. He went over there with his skateboard, tried to hit Kyle, tried to take his rifle from him, according to his girlfriend, and that's when a round was fired at Anthony Huber's chest and hitting his aorta, subsequently killing him in the process. The fourth charge being attempted first-degree intentional homicide, use of a dangerous weapon. Now, this is against the guy, I'm not really sure how to say his last name, we'll call him Gage. Gage was the person who approached Kyle while Kyle was sitting on the ground and he had a firearm in his hand. You can see him approaching Kyle. He throws his hands up, then he goes to take another step, and that's when Kyle shot him in the arm. Now, for this, they are saying that it is an attempted first-degree intentional homicide. We just went over what intentional homicide is. An attempt at first-degree intentional homicide carries the same definition as intentional homicide, but it wasn't carried through. That person didn't actually die as a result of the acts being taken against them. It still is a serious charge. It doesn't carry the same weight as one that had actually succeeded, which has a maximum sentence of life in prison, but instead this is downgraded to a Class B felony where the maximum sentence is 60 years. Now, for the last one that we're going to cover in this video, there is two more, but the one about Kyle being under 18 and being in possession of a firearm, I wanted to do that one on a video of its own because there's a little bit more to go over in that one because it isn't so cut and dry like the other ones are somewhat kind of cut and dry. This one has a little bit more nuance that I wanted to cover in its own video. But this fifth charge is first degree recklessly endangering the safety, use of a dangerous weapon. Now, this is the same charge as the one involving Mr. McGinnis, the Daily Caller reporter, but this one is identified as being aimed at an unknown male. Now that we've gone over the definitions of the charges and we've talked a little bit about their consequences and the nuance between first degree and second degree, I want to go ahead and move on to the criminal complaint. Like I said, the last charge we're going to go ahead and cover in a video of its own. So now I just want to read what Richard McGinnis said in the criminal complaint and what they used as probable cause for charging Kyle Rittenhouse with these particular crimes. Criminal complaint under probable cause. Your complainant spoke with Sergeant Melichar, I'm not going to say the rest of them, and a few detectives of the Kenosha Police Department who provided the following information on August 25th, 2020. An 8 p.m. curfew had been imposed east of I-94 in Kenosha County due to civil unrest. On August 25th at approximately 11:45 p.m., a shooting occurred at Car Source, which is located at the northwest corner of 63rd Street and Sheridan Road in the city and county of Kenosha, state of Wisconsin. The man who was shot at this location was identified as Joseph Rosenbaum. Rosenbaum was transported to a local hospital where a doctor declared him to be deceased on August 26, 2020 at 12:47 a.m. In the course of investigating this incident, law enforcement reviewed and shared with your complainant multiple videos that appeared to be recorded on cell phones. In the first video, a male who was later identified to be Kyle Rittenhouse is running southwest across the eastern portion of the Car Source parking lot. The defendant is a resident of Antioch, Illinois. The defendant can clearly be seen holding a long gun, which was later recovered by law enforcement and identified as a Smith & Wesson AR-15 style .223 rifle. The recovered magazine for this rifle holds 30 rounds of ammunition. Following the defendant is Rosenbaum, and trailing behind the defendant and Rosenbaum is a male who was later identified as Richard McGinnis, a reporter. The video shows that as they cross the parking lot, Rosenbaum appears to throw an object at the defendant. The object does not hit the defendant, and a second video shows, based on where the object landed, that it was a plastic bag. Rosenbaum appears to be unarmed for the duration of this video. A review of the second video shows that the defendant and Rosenbaum continue to move across the parking lot and approach the front of a black car parked in the lot. A loud bang is heard on the video, then a male shouts, "Fuck you." Then Rosenbaum appears to continue to approach the defendant and gets in near proximity to the defendant. When 4 more loud bangs are heard, Rosenbaum then falls to the ground. The defendant then circles behind the black car and approaches Rosenbaum. Rosenbaum remains on the ground. McGinnis also approaches, removes his shirt, and attempts to render aid to Rosenbaum. The defendant appears to get on his cell phone and place a call. Another male approaches, and the defendant turns and begins to run away from the scene. As the defendant is running away, he can be heard saying on the phone, "I just killed somebody." Detective Seapress interviewed McGinnis and indicates the following. Before the shooting, McGinnis was interviewing the defendant. The defendant told McGinnis that he was a trained medic. McGinnis stated that he, McGinnis, has handled many ARs and that the defendant was not handling the weapon very well. McGinnis said as they were walking south, another armed male who appeared to be in his 30s joined them and said he was there to protect the defendant. McGinnis stated that before the defendant reached the parking lot and ran across it, the defendant had moved from the middle of Sheridan Road to the sidewalk, and that is when McGinnis saw a male, Rosenbaum, initially try to engage the defendant. McGinnis stated that as the defendant was walking, Rosenbaum was trying to get closer to the defendant. When Rosenbaum advanced, the defendant did a juke move and started running. McGinnis stated that there were other people that were moving very quickly. McGinnis stated that they were moving towards the defendant. McGinnis said that according to what he saw, the defendant was trying to evade these individuals. McGinnis described the point where the defendant had reached the car. McGinnis described that the defendant had the gun in a low ready position, meaning that he had the gun raised but was pointed downward. The butt of the gun would have also been at an angle downwards from the shoulder. McGinnis stated that the defendant brought the gun up. McGinnis stated that he stepped back, and he thinks the defendant fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. McGinnis said when the first round went off, he thought it hit the pavement. McGinnis felt something on his leg, and his first thought was wondering whether or not he had gotten shot. McGinnis was behind and slightly to the right of Rosenbaum in the line of fire when the defendant shot. McGinnis stated that the first round went into the ground, and when the second shot went off, the defendant actually had the gun aimed at Rosenbaum. McGinnis stated that he did not hear the two exchange any words. McGinnis said that the unarmed guy, Rosenbaum, was trying to get the defendant's gun. McGinnis demonstrated by extending both of his hands in a quick grabbing motion and did that as a visual on how Rosenbaum tried to reach for the defendant's gun. Detective Seapress indicates that he asked McGinnis if Rosenbaum had his hands on the gun when the defendant shot. McGinnis said that he definitely made a motion that he was trying to grab the barrel of the gun. McGinnis stated that the defendant pulled it away and then raised it. McGinnis stated that right as they came together, the defendant fired. McGinnis said that when Rosenbaum was shot, he had leaned in towards the defendant. McGinnis stated that after the defendant shot, he ran back towards the hospital, towards the middle of the road. McGinnis stayed and turned his attention to Rosenbaum. McGinnis stated that he then heard other shots really soon after. The third video that your complainant reviewed shows the defendant running northbound on Sheridan Road after he had shot Rosenbaum. The street and the sidewalk are full of people. A group of several people begin running northbound on Sheridan behind the defendant. A person can be heard yelling what sounds like "beat him up." Another person can be heard yelling what sounds like "hey, he shot him." Your complainant reviewed the fourth video that showed a different angle of the defendant running northbound. In this video, a person can be heard yelling "get him, get that dude." Then a male in a light colored top runs toward the defendant and appears to swing at the defendant with his right arm. This swing makes contact with the defendant, knocking his hat off. The defendant continues to run northbound. On the video, a male can be heard saying something to the effect of "what'd he do?" Another male can be heard responding something to the effect of "he just shot someone." Then a male can be heard yelling "get his ass." The defendant then trips and falls to the ground. As the defendant is on the ground, an unidentified male wearing a dark colored top and a light colored pants jumps at and over the defendant. Based on the sounds of the gunshot on the video and the positioning of the defendant's gun, it appears that he fires 2 shots in quick succession at this person. It appears that that person was not hit as he runs away from the defendant. A second person, who was later identified as Anthony Huber, approaches the defendant, who is still on the ground on his back. Huber has a skateboard in his right hand. When Huber reaches the defendant, it appears that he is reaching for the defendant's gun with his left hand, and the skateboard makes contact with the defendant's shoulder. Huber appears to be trying to pull the gun away from the defendant. The defendant rolls towards his left side, and as Huber appears to be trying to grab the gun is pointed at Huber's body. The defendant then fires 1 round, which can be heard on the video. Huber staggers away, taking several steps, then collapses to the ground. Huber subsequently died from this gunshot wound. After shooting Huber, the defendant moves to a seated position and points his gun at a third male, later identified as Gage Grosskreutz. When the defendant shot Huber, Groskowitz freezes and ducks and takes a step back. Groskowitz puts his hands in the air. Groskowitz then moves towards the defendant, who aims his gun at Groskowitz and shoots him, firing one shot. Groskowitz was shot in the right arm. Groskowitz appears to be holding a gun in his right hand when he was shot. Groskowitz then runs southbound away from the defendant, screaming for a medic, and the defendant gets up and starts walking northbound. The defendant turns around facing southbound while walking backwards northbound, with his firearm in a ready position pointed towards the people in the roadway. Dr. Kelly of the Milwaukee Medical Examiner's Office conducted an autopsy on Joseph Rosenbaum. Dr. Kelly indicated that Rosenbaum had a gunshot wound to the right groin, which fractured his pelvis, a gunshot wound to the back, which perforated his right lung and liver, a gunshot wound to the left hand, a superficial gunshot wound to his lateral left thigh, and a grazed gunshot wound to the right side of his forehead. Dr. Kelly also conducted an autopsy on Anthony Huber. Dr. Kelly indicated that Huber had a gunshot wound to his chest that perforated his heart, aorta, pulmonary artery, and right lung. Detective A spoke with Dominic Black on August 26, 2020. Dominic stated that he received a phone call from his friend Kyle Rittenhouse, the defendant, at 11:46 p.m., in which the defendant stated that he shot someone. Detective A saw the defendant in person at the Antioch, Illinois Police Department and identified the defendant as the shooter in the various videos. So now we've gone over the charges levied at Kyle Rittenhouse, as well as the statements given in the criminal complaint by Richard McGinnis and the other people that were involved, like the detectives and the doctor who performed the autopsy. That is everything that I am going to cover in this video, but like I said, I'm going to go ahead and kind of comment on what I feel. Given the way that the laws are written and given the circumstances, not just the videos, but all of the circumstances involving this situation, I'm really not sure how many of these are likely to stick, if any at all. In my next video, we're going to talk about the charge for him possessing a weapon under the age of 18. I don't think it's as clear cut and dry as people think that it is, because they're only reading as far as what supports their side of the argument, and they're not reading the entire statute, which goes on to illuminate the nuance of the statute itself. So in my next video, I will be discussing that, and I'm also going to do a video on the self-defense argument that people are putting forth, that Kyle was justified in his actions because it was self-defense. So make sure to be on the lookout for that. It will be coming out shortly. And as always, I appreciate you guys watching my video. If you haven't already, like this video, share this video so other people can see it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for notifications. That way you'll be informed when all my latest videos come out. Leave a comment on this video, whether you agree, disagree, or you want to give me some pointers on my videos themselves or topics that you want me to talk about, or if you just want to call me an asshole, go ahead and leave that comment in the comment section below. As always, you guys are watching Inspiring Inquiry.